The purpose of this video is to show you how you can write an introduction to your comparative essay, and hopefully this will be a useful tool for you as you're preparing for your assessment. I'll briefly go through the structure of an introduction. I'll also show you some examples and a finished product, and I will also give you hopefully a helpful tip at the end when you're planning and preparing. Okay, first things first, structure. There are really 4 things that you should be thinking about in terms of structure. I'm going to show them to you now, and then I'll go through each one slowly. Okay, the first thing that you need to think about is introducing the poems and giving a little bit of background to them. That should be 1 or 2 sentences at the start of your introduction. You should then go on to your contention, or as some of you might know it as, a thesis statement, which focuses on the ideas about war in the poems and how they compare to one another. Obviously, if we weren't doing this on war, it'd be another broad subject like love or relationships or anything like that. But because we're doing war in this circumstance, that's what you need to be focusing on. Okay? After that, number 3, briefly state the differences between the poems and how these differences are presented. A little typo there. Because we're doing a comparative, you obviously need to be thinking about differences and similarities, so include a bit of that in your introduction. And as you might have guessed, the last thing that you need to talk about, briefly state the similarities between the poems and how they are presented. Fix that little typo there. Okay, so what does that actually look like? First thing, introduce the poems and give a little background to them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a sample few sentences and then combine it all into an introduction at the end. So, we're talking about Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson and Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth. So this is what I've said. Alfred Lord Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade and Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth present 2 different ways that war was remembered in the 19th and 20th century respectively. Just a quick tip. Respectively basically means I've got 19th and 20th century. By adding respectively, I'm saying that they correspond to the above 2 poems. So Tennyson's is 19th century and Owen's is 20th century. Okay, now you know how to use that word properly. The reason for this difference may be because Tennyson wrote as an observer to war, whilst Owen was a frontline soldier who experienced trench warfare in World War I. So there we go. A bit of background to the poems, when they were written, okay, and a bit about the poets themselves, and linking those things together, why there might be some differences between the poems and how they represent war. Okay, this isn't like a strict structure, but you get an idea of this is the kind of background you want to include. Next thing, state your contention or thesis statement, which focuses on the ideas about war in the poems and how they compare to one another. Obviously, this is the most important part of your introduction because it tells whoever's reading your essay the main point, what you're trying to get across. Okay, following on from before, as a result, Tennyson's poem focuses on the glory of war and the heroism of soldiers. Owen's poem emphasizes the cruel reality of war for both soldiers and those who wait for their return at home. Very clear thesis statement of contention. Briefly state the differences between the poems and how these differences are presented. Now, obviously, because I've just talked about differences in my contention, I've chosen not to, introduce this idea of differences in this sentence. I've just talked about how those differences are conveyed, how they're brought out by the poets. Okay? So this is predominantly shown through the attitude and tone of the poets, the imagery used, and the structure of the poems. We've talked a lot about tone, imagery, and structure in class, so hopefully this is starting to make a bit more sense to you. Briefly state the similarities between the poems and how they are presented. Okay, here's what I've got. Despite the contrasting ideas in each of the poems, both of them share common features such as the use of poetic techniques to convey the sounds of the setting, as well as the depiction of the battlefield as harsh, dangerous, and unforgiving. Okay? Here is the whole thing put together. Please pause the video and take note of everything in order, please. Okay, here's my tip about writing introductions. You should only really write your introduction after you have a solid thesis statement or contention. Therefore, you know exactly what your essay is going to be about and when you planned your body paragraphs. Why? Well, once you've planned your body paragraphs, basically your introduction, and for that matter your conclusion, are summaries of what you've got in your body paragraphs. So if you focus on your thesis statement or contention first, and then you go on to planning your body paragraphs, then you'll know pretty much what you need to include into your introduction. Okay? Hope that was helpful. Feel free to post any questions on the portal when this is posted up. Thank you.